In Pennsylvania, there are houses no one dares to live in. Not because they're old, but because everyone who entered them reported the same feeling. Something inside was aware they were there. These are real horror stories from abandoned houses across Pennsylvania, based on actual reports and unexplained events. If you want more true horror stories like this, subscribe to Vesper Shroud, because these houses are still standing. Story 1. House everyone in Pennsylvania avoided. I did not believe in curses until I bought the house in Pennsylvania. This is the part where I tell you to stop listening if you scare easily. You need to hear this. You need to know what I found there, because if you ever drive through the mountains of rural Pennsylvania, past the dying coal towns and the empty factories, you might see it too. And you might make the same mistake I did. The property sat at the end of a long gravel road, surrounded by dense forest on all sides. The real estate agent spoke in a nervous voice when I called. She said it was priced to sell. When I asked why, she got very quiet. Then she said the previous owners left everything behind. Furniture still in the rooms, clothes in the closets, dishes on the kitchen table, covered in a thick layer of dust and something else I could not identify. That should have been my first warning. I was newly divorced, 47 years old, and desperate to start fresh. A house at such a low price felt like a miracle. I saw it on a Saturday morning in late October, when the Pennsylvania autumn was at its most beautiful and most terrifying. The trees were skeletal and red. The sky hung low and gray. The wind made a constant sound through the branches, almost like whispering. The house itself was a colonial-style structure, built in 1887 according to the deed. 3 stories, white paint peeling like dead skin, black shutters hanging crooked, a wraparound porch that had started to rot. The creepy sensation hit me the moment I stepped out of my car, but I pushed it down. I was tired of being afraid of things. I was tired of running. The real estate agent, a thin woman named Susan, met me there with trembling hands. She kept glancing over her shoulder toward the tree line. When I asked about the previous residents, she told me their name was Hartley. They had lasted only 14 days. 14 days. I should have asked more questions. Instead, I asked about the price again. Susan quoted me a number so low it seemed impossible. I asked about the condition. She said the structure was solid. The foundation was fine. The roof was new from 15 years ago. Everything was in working order. Everything except, she added quietly, the previous families kept leaving. I could not help myself. I asked how many families. She said she did not know exactly. The records went back decades, but at least a dozen, maybe more. Police were never called because nothing illegal ever happened. The families just left. Some packed, some did not. Some called 911 and then hung up mid-sentence when the dispatcher tried to get more information. This story should have terrified me into walking away. It did not. Instead, I felt a strange pull toward the place. I felt like the house was calling to me, like it needed someone who understood loneliness. I signed the paperwork 3 days later. The first month was quiet, almost too quiet. I learned the rhythms of the house slowly, the way the pipes groaned at 3 in the morning, the way the boards settled in the afternoons, creating sounds like slow footsteps in the hallways above me, the way the basement doors always seemed slightly ajar, even after I locked them. I bought new furniture. I painted the kitchen a bright yellow. I tried to make the place feel less haunted and more like a home. Some nights, I convinced myself it was working. Other nights, I felt the unsettling presence that seemed to settle on the house like fog once the sun went down. It was not a ghost. I did not believe in ghosts. It was something else, something older, something that had been watching these rooms for more than 100 years, waiting for someone like me to move in. The creepy sound started around day 35. I was lying in bed, reading a book on an October night so dark that the only light in the room came from my nightstand lamp. The house was doing its usual settling and groaning, the normal sounds of an old structure breathing in the cold. Then I heard something different, a rhythmic tapping, soft and deliberate, coming from inside the walls. Tap, 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 not the random sound of pipes or the wind, not the scurrying of mice or squirrels, something intentional, something that seemed to follow a pattern, moving from one side of the room to the other, traveling down the hallway, descending the stairs. I told myself it was probably just the house settling, but the hair on my arms stood straight up. My breathing became shallow. I waited, listening, as the sound made its way through the entire first floor, then slowly climbed back upstairs toward my bedroom. When it stopped directly outside my door, I held my breath so completely that I thought I might pass out. Nothing happened. The sound simply ceased, but I did not sleep that night. The nightmare intensity grew over the following weeks. The tapping continued, always after dark, always following some route through the house that I could never quite predict. Sometimes it would last for hours. Other times it would tap just 3 times and disappear. The eerie quality of it was that it never sounded angry or violent. It sounded patient, like something learning the layout of the house by touch, mapping out every room, every corner, every potential hiding place. I called a contractor to inspect the walls. He found nothing. No damage, no loose pipes, no animal nests. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and fear and told me that houses this old sometimes just made strange noises. That I should get used to it. But I was not used to it. And I knew, in a way I could not explain, that the house was not just making noise. The house was communicating. By November, I had started documenting everything in a notebook. Not because I believed anything supernatural was happening, but because documenting it made me feel less insane. I wrote down the time of each occurrence, the location, the pattern, the duration. I was looking for some rational explanation that would explain away the terrifying feeling that I was sharing my home with something intelligent and watchful. That was when I found the basement door open one morning. I had been locking that door every night since I moved in. I had actually nailed it shut in September, using 3-inch galvanized nails and a hammer that I kept on my nightstand. But there it was, hanging open, the nails pried out with something sharp, lying on the basement floor like dropped teeth. My hands shook as I peered down into the darkness below. The basement was an unfinished space, with a dirt floor and wooden support beams that looked like the bones of some ancient creature. I had only been down there twice, and both times I had felt the crushing weight of something watching me from the shadows. I did not go down that morning. Instead, I nailed the door shut again, using 5 nails this time. I also bought 2 deadbolts and installed them myself, my hands shaking so badly that I nearly dropped the screwdriver twice. That night, I heard the nails being pried out again. I did not check the door. I sat in my bed with every light in the house turned on, my phone in my hand, trying to decide if calling the police would make me sound insane. What would I tell them? That something paranormal was trying to get out of my basement? That my house was haunted or cursed or something worse than both? By morning, the door was hanging open again. This time, there was something new. The dirt floor of the basement had been disturbed, and there was a trail of dark material running from the center of the basement toward the stairs. It looked like soil that had been raked or dragged. It looked like something had been burrowing. The creepy realization hit me then, a sudden spike of pure fear that made my stomach drop. The house was not trying to hurt me. The house was trying to show me something. It was trying to lead me somewhere. I should have left that day. I should have called a realtor and walked away and never looked back. But I had nowhere else to go. I had burned too many bridges in my divorce. My job was remote. My family had stopped calling years ago. This house, this haunted, cursed, impossibly eerie house in the middle of rural Pennsylvania, was all I had. So I stayed. The darkness in the basement seemed to grow thicker as November progressed. I would catch glimpses of something moving down there when I looked through the basement door, always in my peripheral vision, always just out of focus. When I tried to look directly at it, it would vanish, and I would see only the shifting shadows and the empty dirt floor. The nightmare quality of my situation finally crystallized one night in late November. I was reading in bed around midnight when the tapping started again, but different this time. Instead of moving through the house, it was coming from directly beneath my bed. Tap, 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 right underneath where I was lying, separated from whatever was doing the tapping by only a few inches of wood and air. I scrambled out of bed, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would tear through my ribs. I stood in the corner of the room, watching the space under my bed, waiting to see what would emerge. Nothing did, but I knew, with absolute certainty, that something was down there. Something that had been in my house the entire time. Something that had been biding its time, learning my routines, understanding my patterns, waiting for the right moment. That was when I remembered what the real estate agent had said. Families would call 911 and then hang up mid-sentence. I finally went into the basement the next morning. It took every ounce of courage I had. I armed myself with a baseball bat and a flashlight, fully aware of how useless both would be if whatever was down there decided to move. The stairs creaked under my weight, each step a betrayal, each sound announcing my arrival to whatever waited in the darkness below. The basement was colder than it should have been, even for a November morning. The air had a thickness to it, a quality that made it hard to breathe. The trail I had seen before was still there, but now I could see that it was not just disturbed soil. It was blood, old blood, brown and oxidized, running from the center of the basement toward a corner that had been blocked off by the previous owners with a wall of cinder blocks. The blocks had been partially dismantled. Someone, or something, had been moving them, one by one, stacking them neatly to the side. There were only 3 blocks left standing, creating a gap just large enough for something to squeeze through. I aimed my flashlight at the opening. Beyond it, the basement extended further than it should have been possible to extend. The space opened up into a series of tunnels carved directly into the earth, supported by wooden beams that looked older than the house itself. The walls of the tunnels glistened with moisture and something darker. And running through the center of the main tunnel was what appeared to be a trench, dug deep into the ground, with bones scattered along the edges. Human bones. The horrifying realization came slowly, like a poison entering my bloodstream. The house had not just been driving people away. It had been collecting them. Someone, or something, had been using this house as a trap, luring families in with the promise of a home and then harvesting them in this unsettling tunnel system beneath the foundation. And I had been living on top of it the entire time. I dropped the flashlight and ran. I did not stop to grab my phone or my wallet or anything else. I ran up the basement stairs, through the kitchen, out the front door, and into the Pennsylvania forest, where the trees seemed to lean toward me as I passed, their branches reaching like skeletal fingers. I did not stop running until I reached the main road, where I flagged down a state trooper who was passing by. I told him what I had found, watching his expression shift from skepticism to horror as I described the basement, the tunnels, the bones. The police investigation took 6 months. They excavated the basement and the tunnel system, discovering the remains of 34 people dating back more than 70 years. The oldest remains belonged to a young woman who had disappeared in 1952. The most recent belonged to a man who had vanished in 2018. The terrifying part was that no evidence was ever found of how the tunnels were dug or maintained. The geological surveys indicated that the tunnels should have collapsed years ago, but the wooden supports were still intact, still strong, as if they had been preserved by something, as if something was maintaining them. No arrests were ever made. No suspect was ever identified. The official report concluded that the house had been used as a disposal site by multiple individuals over several decades, but the investigation never explained how or why the families had simply left. Why none of them had called the police until after they were already gone. Or rather, why they had called 911 and then hung up mid-sentence. The house still stands in rural Pennsylvania. The police sealed the basement and blocked off the tunnels. The property was seized by the county and has never been put up for sale again. Local teenagers dare each other to drive past it on dark nights, though no one has ever reported going inside. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had stayed longer. If I had continued to ignore the warning signs, the creepy sensations, the unsettling presence that the previous families had somehow understood before I did. Would I have gone down into the basement willingly? Would I have moved to the cinder blocks myself and walked deeper into those tunnels? Would I have eventually been added to the collection of bones scattered along that terrifying trench? I will never know. But I know this much. That house in Pennsylvania is still waiting. It is still patient. And somewhere right now, someone is probably looking at the same low price, feeling the same desperate need for a fresh start, unaware that they are about to become part of something much older and much darker than they could possibly understand. The house does not hurt its residents. It does not need to. It simply shows them exactly what they are afraid to find, and then waits for them to run. And when they run, the house waits for the next family. The tapping continues every night, methodical and patient, moving through empty rooms in a house that no one lives in anymore. The sound is still there, I am told, by the rare police officers who were brave enough to enter the basement. Tap, 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 like something learning, something mapping, something preparing, something that has been waiting for more than 100 years and does not mind waiting longer still. Story 2. Lights in the farmhouse. I never believed in ghosts until I spent 3 nights alone in that Pennsylvania farmhouse, watching lights move through rooms that had been dark for 15 years. My name is David, and I used to investigate insurance fraud for a living. Corporate cases, staged accidents, nothing scary. But when the Mercer County Sheriff asked me to look into an abandoned property claim outside Harrisburg, I thought it would be easy money. A farmhouse sitting empty since 2010, owners long gone, neighbors complaining about trespassers. The insurance company wanted proof of vandalism before paying out. Simple documentation job. I would set up cameras, spend a few nights, catch whoever was breaking in, and collect my fee. The property sat 40 minutes outside town, down a winding rural highway lined with dense woods. October in central Pennsylvania meant early darkness, fog settling into valleys, and that particular kind of silence that makes you aware of your own breathing. I arrived just before sunset, my truck loaded with equipment and supplies for a 3-day stay. The farmhouse looked exactly like the photos. 2 stories, white paint peeling in long strips, wraparound porch sagging on the left side. Windows intact but clouded with years of grime. The barn behind it had partially collapsed, and wild grass had reclaimed most of the yard. What the photos had not captured was the feeling of the place. Standing there in the fading light, I felt watched. Not by people, by the house itself. I know how that sounds. But I am telling you what I felt. The neighbors had been clear in their statements. Lights moving from window to window after dark. Always between midnight and 3 in the morning. Always starting in the upstairs bedroom, moving down the hallway, descending the stairs, ending in the kitchen. Then darkness again. The pattern repeated 2 or 3 times each week for the past 6 months. Every witness described the same thing. Warm yellow light, like oil lamps or candles, drifting slowly through the empty rooms. The utility company confirmed what made this truly disturbing. The house had no power. The electrical service had been disconnected in 2010 when the last owners died. No solar panels, no generator. The property was completely off-grid, and yet something was creating light inside those walls. I set up my first camera facing the front door, another covering the side entrance, 2 more pointing at different sections of the upstairs windows. Motion activated. Night vision connected to my laptop inside my truck. Professional-grade equipment. If someone was breaking in, I would catch them. Darkness came fast. By 7, the sun had disappeared behind the western hills, and by 8, the only illumination came from my laptop screen and a small LED lantern. I sat in my truck, parked 30 yards from the house, watching the feeds and eating a cold sandwich. The temperature dropped. Fog began rolling across the overgrown fields. Nothing happened for hours. At 11:30, I was considering sleeping when movement caught my eye. Not on the cameras. In the actual house, a light had appeared in the second-floor window. Faint, yellowish, flickering slightly like a flame. My heart started hammering. I checked the camera feeds. Nothing. The motion sensors had not triggered. But I could see it with my own eyes. A light moving behind the grimy glass of the upstairs bedroom. I grabbed my flashlight and got out of the truck. The night air was cold and damp. Fog swirled around my boots as I approached the porch. Every instinct told me to get back in the truck and leave, but I needed to document this. That was my job. I was being paid to investigate. The front door was locked. I had the key from the property manager. My hands shook as I unlocked it. The door swung inward with a long creaking sound that seemed obscenely loud in the silence. The smell hit me immediately. Old wood, mildew, and something else. Something sweet and rotten that made my stomach turn. I stepped inside, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness of the front hallway. Wallpaper hung in strips. Floorboards creaked under my weight. Dust covered everything in a thick blanket that showed no footprints except mine. The light was still visible upstairs. I could see the faint glow reflecting on the hallway ceiling above me. I climbed the stairs slowly, testing each step. The house groaned around me. Settling, I told myself. Old buildings make noise, but it sounded like breathing, like the walls were expanding and contracting with lungs I could not see. The upstairs hallway stretched before me. 4 doors, all closed. The light was coming from behind the door at the end, the master bedroom, according to the floor plan I had studied. I walked toward it. Each step felt like moving through water. The air grew thicker, harder to breathe. The sweet rotten smell intensified. My flashlight beam trembled as my hands shook. I reached for the doorknob. It was ice cold. I turned it and pushed the door open. The room was empty. Completely empty. No furniture, no candles, no lanterns. Nothing that could produce light. But the glow was there, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. A soft yellow illumination that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. I could see every detail of the room. Water-stained ceiling, warped floorboards, a dark stain in the corner that looked disturbingly like dried blood. Then the light began to move. It flowed like liquid across the ceiling, pooling in the doorway behind me. I spun around. The glow slid down the hallway toward the stairs, moving with clear intention. I followed, unable to stop myself. Terrified but compelled, the light descended the staircase. I watched it go, this impossible illumination that had no source. It reached the bottom and turned left, heading toward the back of the house. Toward the kitchen. I went down after it, The kitchen was in worse shape than the rest of the house. Cabinets hung open. The old stove was covered in rust. Linoleum curled up at the edges. And in the center of the room, the light hovered. It pulsed gently, growing brighter and dimmer in a rhythm that reminded me of a heartbeat. I stood in the doorway, frozen. The light began to change. It was showing me something. Images formed in the glow. Shadowy shapes. I saw a woman standing at the stove. A man sitting at an unseen table. 2 children running through the room. The family that had lived here. The family that had died here. The historical records had mentioned it briefly. Murder-suicide. 2010. Father killed his wife and children before hanging himself in the barn. Financial troubles. Foreclosure notice. A man who had lost everything deciding to take his family with him rather than face the world. The light was showing me that night. I watched the shadow of the father grow larger, darker. I watched the smaller shadows fall. I heard nothing, but I could feel the screaming in my bones. The terror, the betrayal, the horrible final moments of people who should have been safe in their own home. Then the light rushed at me. I ran, pure instinct. I bolted through the hallway, crashed through the front door, sprinted across the yard to my truck. I threw myself inside and locked the doors, gasping for breath, heart exploding in my chest. The house stood dark and silent. I sat there shaking for 20 minutes before I could even think clearly. My cameras had recorded nothing. The motion sensors had not triggered once. But I had seen it. I had been inside that house. I had witnessed something that should not exist. I should have left. Any reasonable person would have driven away and never come back. But something kept me there. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the money. Maybe it was the horrible fascination that makes people slow down at accident scenes. Or maybe the house wanted me to stay. The second night was worse. I remained in my truck, watching, waiting. The light appeared again at midnight. Same pattern. Upstairs bedroom, down the hallway, down the stairs, into the kitchen. But this time it did not stop there. The light came to the front door. It pressed against the windows like fog, seeping through cracks I could not see. It surrounded my truck. I could feel it trying to get inside. Searching. Hungry, I turned on the engine and the headlights. The light retreated instantly, flowing back into the house like water down a drain. Darkness returned. I kept the truck running all night. Headlights blazing, burning through half a tank of gas. As long as I had light of my own, the thing in the house kept its distance. Dawn came as a mercy. The farmhouse looked harmless in the pale morning sun. Just an old abandoned building. Nothing scary, nothing impossible. I told myself I would finish the job. One more night, document everything, then leave and never think about this place again. That was my plan. The third night, the house changed its pattern. The light appeared early. 9 p.m., not in the bedroom, in the basement. I had not been in the basement. The door was in the kitchen, and I had avoided it. Basements in abandoned houses are bad enough without adding paranormal activity. But now I could see a glow coming from the small windows at ground level. Faint but unmistakable. Something was calling me down there. I knew it was a trap. I knew going into that basement was the worst decision I could make. But I also knew I would never sleep again if I did not see what was down there. The mystery would eat me alive. The not knowing would be worse than any horror I might face. I went inside for the last time. The basement door stood open. I had not opened it. The darkness below was absolute except for that faint glow at the bottom of the wooden stairs. Each step creaked as I descended. The smell was overwhelming now. Death and decay and something chemical that burned my nostrils. The basement was unfinished. Dirt floor, stone foundation walls, support beams every few feet. And in the far corner, the source of the light. Not a ghost, not a spirit, a person. He sat in an old wooden chair, surrounded by battery-powered lanterns. Dozens of them, all around him, creating that warm yellow glow I had seen from outside. His clothes were filthy. His beard was long and matted. His eyes reflected the lantern light like an animal. Yes. He smiled at me with broken teeth. "This is my house," he said. His voice was rough from disuse. "I live here. I have always lived here." He was the son, the one who had survived. The oldest child who had been away at college when his father murdered the family. I recognized him from old photos I had seen in the research. 20 years older now, 40 pounds heavier. Completely insane. He had been living in the basement for months. Maybe years, coming up at night to move his lanterns through the rooms, creating the ghost story, keeping people away, protecting his territory. I backed toward the stairs. He stood up slowly. In his hand was a hunting knife, the blade dark with old stains. "You should not have come here," he said. "Nobody should come here. This is where they died. This is where I should have died. This is where we all belong." I ran, Up the stairs, through the kitchen, he followed, shambling but determined. I could hear him behind me, breathing hard, whispering to himself. Words I could not understand. Prayers or curses or just the broken thoughts of a shattered mind. I made it to my truck, locked the doors, started the engine. He emerged from the house and stood in the yard, watching me leave. Not chasing, just watching. The lantern light glowed behind him in the kitchen window. I drove straight to the sheriff's office, told them everything. They found him the next morning, still in the basement, sitting among his lanterns. He did not resist, did not speak, just smiled that broken smile. They charged him with trespassing. They evaluated him and sent him to a psychiatric facility. The farmhouse was secured and eventually demolished. But here's what keeps me awake. Before they tore it down, I went back one last time. Daylight, police present, completely safe. I needed to see the basement in proper light. Needed to prove to myself that everything had a rational explanation. The lanterns were there, dozens of them, but every single battery was dead, corroded. Some had been dead for years based on the damage. Those lanterns could not have produced light. They were empty shells. So what had I seen moving through those rooms? What had shown me the death of that family? What had called me down into the darkness? I still do not know. I do not think I want to know. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Some doors are better left closed. Some lights in the darkness are not meant to guide us home. They are meant to lead us somewhere else. Somewhere we were never meant to go. If these Pennsylvania stories feel unsettling, make sure you're subscribed to Vesper Shroud. We focus on true horror stories tied to real American locations. And what's coming next is even darker. Story 3. Basement door. I need to tell you something before they find me. Before whoever was in that basement comes looking for the rest of us. My name is Marcus Webb, and 3 weeks ago I was part of a demolition crew that made a discovery in rural Pennsylvania that should have stayed buried. What we found in that house changed everything I thought I knew about fear, about the darkness that exists in forgotten places, and about the horrifying truth that some doors should never be open. The job seemed simple enough. An old Victorian house outside of Scranton, standing alone at the end of a dirt road that time had forgotten. The property owner wanted it gone fast, no questions asked, no delays. The pay was good, suspiciously good, and my boss took the contract without hesitation. We arrived on a gray October morning when the mist hung low over the Pennsylvania hills like a funeral shroud. The house looked dead from the outside, peeling paint, broken windows, a porch that sagged under its own weight. But as we approached with our equipment, I felt something unsettling in my chest, a creeping sensation that we were being watched from those dark windows. My crew felt it too. Nobody wanted to admit it, but I saw the way they hesitated before entering, the way their eyes kept darting back to the tree line as if expecting something to emerge from the shadows. Inside, the house smelled wrong. Not the usual decay and mildew you expect in abandoned buildings, but something else, something organic and disturbing that made my stomach turn. The air felt thick, almost warm, despite the October cold seeping through the broken windows. Furniture sat covered in dust, frozen in time like a museum of someone's abandoned life. Family photos lined the walls, their faces obscured by grime and shadow, but I swear their eyes seemed to follow us as we moved through the rooms. We split up to survey the structure. I took the ground floor while my partner Jake headed upstairs. That is when I found it. At the end of a narrow hallway, past the kitchen with its rusted appliances and yellowed linoleum, stood a door. A basement door. Heavy wood, dark and weathered, with an old brass handle that gleamed despite the dust covering everything else. The door was locked, but not from the outside. The deadbolt had been thrown from the inside, from down in the basement itself, locking whatever was below away from the rest of the house. Or locking us out. I called Jake down, and we stood there staring at that door, neither of us wanting to say what we were both thinking. Why would someone lock a basement door from the inside? What were they keeping down there? Or what were they hiding from? Jake pulled out his crowbar. The metal scraped against wood as he wedged it into the frame, the sound echoing through the empty house like a scream. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to stop, to leave this door closed, to walk away from this job and never look back. But we had a schedule to keep, a house to demolish by sunset. The door splintered with a crack that sounded too much like breaking bones. The deadbolt tore free, and the door swung open on hinges that shrieked in protest. Darkness yawned before us, thick and absolute, the kind of darkness that feels alive, that seems to breathe and pulse with malevolent intent. But it was the warmth that made my blood run cold. Heat poured from that basement like an open furnace, a wave of dry, disturbing warmth that had no right existing in an abandoned house in October. Jake shone his flashlight down the wooden stairs, the beam cutting through the blackness but revealing nothing except more steps descending into shadow. The air rising from below carried that same wrong smell, stronger now, mixed with something else I could not quite identify but made my primitive brain scream danger. We descended slowly, every step creaking under our weight. The warmth grew more intense, oppressive, making sweat bead on my forehead despite the fear freezing my blood. The basement should have been cold, damp, full of spiders and rot. Instead, it felt like walking into something, its mouth, something massive and patient and endlessly hungry. When we reached the bottom, Jake, his flashlight swept across the space. The basement was empty, completely, impossibly empty. No furnace, no water heater, no stored furniture or boxes or any explanation for the heat radiating from the concrete walls. Just bare floor, bare walls, and a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling, dark and dead. But the walls were wrong. As our eyes adjusted, we saw them. Scratches. Thousands upon thousands of scratches covering every inch of concrete from floor to ceiling, carved deep into the stone with what must have been fingernails or something worse. They formed patterns, spirals and symbols that hurt to look at, that seemed to shift and writhe in our peripheral vision like living things trying to burrow into our minds. Jake moved closer to one wall, running his fingers over the grooves. His hand came away warm, the concrete radiating heat like it had been baked in an oven. He turned to me, his face pale in the flashlight beam. And that is when we heard it. Breathing. Not our breathing. Something else. Coming from everywhere and nowhere. A wet, ragged sound that echoed off the scratched walls and filled the empty basement with presence. The temperature spiked. Sweat poured down my back. The light bulb above us flickered once, twice, then blazed to life with a light so bright it burned my eyes. So white it turned the scratches on the walls into writhing shadows that reached for us with fingers made of darkness. We ran. I am not ashamed to admit it. We ran up those stairs like our lives depended on it. Because they did. I know that now. Behind us, the breathing grew louder, faster, excited, like whatever lived in that warmth was pleased we had finally opened its door. The stairs seemed longer going up, stretching impossibly, the doorway at the top receding even as we climbed. Jake was screaming something, but the sound was drowned out by that terrible breathing and a new noise, a scraping like fingernails on concrete, like something climbing the walls, following us up from the depths. We burst through the doorway and into the hallway, stumbling over each other in our panic. I grabbed the basement door and slammed it shut, but there was nothing to lock it with, the deadbolt we had destroyed still lying on the floor in pieces. Through the door, I could hear it, footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate, patient. Something was coming up from the basement, and there was nothing we could do to stop it. Jake was on his phone, screaming at our boss that we needed to demolish the house now, immediately, that something was wrong and we needed to bring it down before nightfall. I backed away from the door, watching the handle, waiting for it to turn. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. Stop. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. Heavy and expectant, like the pause before a predator strikes. The demolition crew arrived within the hour. I have never seen a house come down so fast, so thoroughly. Our boss did not ask questions, did not demand explanations. He took one look at our faces and gave the order. By sunset, the Victorian house was nothing but rubble and dust, the basement buried under tons of broken wood and shattered dreams. But before the walls came down, before the explosives were set, I went back inside one last time. I had to know. I had to see that door one more time. The hallway was darker now, the shadows deeper, like the house knew its time was ending and was gathering its darkness close. The basement door stood open, wide open, as if inviting me down, as if whatever was below had decided it was time to come up and explore the world above. I looked down those stairs one final time. The light bulb still burned bright in the basement, casting long shadows across those terrible scratches. And in the light, I saw something that will haunt me until my dying day. Footprints, wet footprints leading up the stairs, across the basement floor, and disappearing at the top step. Leading out, leading into the house, into the world, into the night. But here's the thing that keeps me awake. The horrifying detail that makes my hands shake as I write this. The footprints were not going down into the basement. They were coming up, multiple sets, different sizes, like a family had been living down there in that heat and darkness, scratching their madness into the walls, waiting for someone to open the door and set them free. The house is gone now, demolished and buried. But I know the truth. Whatever was in that basement, whatever had locked itself away in the darkness and warmth, is out now. The door is open, the lock is broken, and somewhere in Pennsylvania, in the small towns and forgotten highways, in the motels and diners where strangers pass through without a second glance, they are walking among us. I see them sometimes, in crowds, in the corner of my eye. People who move wrong, who stand too still, whose eyes reflect light they should not see. People who are too warm when you stand near them, whose breath comes in that same wet, ragged rhythm I heard in the basement. They are looking for something, or looking for more doors to open, more basements to empty, more darkness to release into the world. Last night, I woke to find my bedroom warm. Not the comfortable warmth of a heater, but that same dry, disturbing heat that poured from the basement in Pennsylvania. My bedroom door was open. I always lock it, always, but it was open, and in the hallway, I could hear breathing. That same breathing, patient, waiting, curious. I have not slept since. I have been writing this account, documenting what we found, hoping that someone will believe me, will understand the terrible mistake we made. The demolition crew that opened that door has scattered. Jake moved to California, changed his name, but he calls me sometimes in the middle of the night, whispering that he feels them getting closer, that the warmth is spreading, that more doors are opening in abandoned places across America, releasing things that should have stayed locked away forever. If you are listening to this, if you have made it this far, I need you to understand something. There are places in this country, forgotten buildings and buried rooms, where doors stand locked from the inside. Leave them closed. Whatever is behind them, whatever has locked itself away in the darkness and the disturbing warmth, is there for a reason. Some doors protect us from what is behind them, but some doors protect what is behind them from us, keeping them contained until someone foolish enough comes along and sets them free. We opened the door, we let them out, and now, as I sit here in my warm bedroom listening to footsteps in the hall, I realize the horrible truth. The basement was not empty when we entered. It was full of things that had been waiting in that heat and darkness for decades, for generations, for someone to finally break the lock and open the door. They are out now, they are among us, and they are so very, very warm. Story 4. Pennsylvania house that knew their names. I never believed in haunted houses until I heard my dead wife whisper my name in the darkness of our new Pennsylvania bedroom. That was 3 weeks ago. I should have left then. I should have run. My name is David, and what I am about to tell you is the most terrifying, horrifying truth I have ever experienced. This is not fiction. This is not some creepy campfire story. This happened to me, and it is still happening. My wife Sarah died in a car accident 2 years before I bought the house. The grief nearly destroyed me. I needed a fresh start, somewhere quiet, somewhere far from the memories that haunted every corner of my old life. That is how I found the property in rural Pennsylvania, 40 minutes outside Pittsburgh, surrounded by dense forest and forgotten farmland. The realtor never mentioned why it sat empty for 7 years, never mentioned the family who died there, never mentioned the whispers. The house was beautiful in a decaying, unsettling way. Victorian architecture, wraparound porch, original hardwood floors that creaked under every step. The price was shockingly low for the size and land. I signed the papers in October, moved in before Halloween, and felt genuinely hopeful for the first time since Sarah's death. That hope lasted exactly 9 days. The first night I heard it, I was unpacking boxes in the master bedroom. The autumn wind rattled the windows, and the old house groaned with settling sounds that felt almost alive. I had just placed a framed photo of Sarah on the nightstand when I heard it. Soft, distant, but unmistakable. My name, David, spoken in a voice that made my blood freeze. It sounded exactly like Sarah. I stood completely still, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The rational part of my brain screamed that it was the wind, that grief was playing tricks, that isolation was making me imagine things. But the voice came again, closer this time. David. The way she used to say it when she wanted my attention. That specific inflection, that exact tone. I searched every room that night. Every closet, every shadow. Nothing. The house was empty except for me and the creeping, chilling sensation that I was being watched from places I could not see. I tried to convince myself it was stress, exhaustion. The mind does strange, disturbing things when you are alone in an unfamiliar place. I almost succeeded in believing that lie. Then the second night came, and I heard another voice, a child, calling a name I did not recognize. Emma, over and over. Emma, where are you? The voice was frightened, desperate, and it came from the hallway outside my bedroom door. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped into the corridor. The temperature had dropped at least 20 degrees. My breath came out in visible clouds. The darkness felt thick, almost solid, pressing against me from all sides. I called out, asking if someone was there, knowing how foolish that sounded. The only response was silence. Heavy, suffocating, eerie. That is when I started researching the house, its history. What I discovered made the fear crawling up my spine turn into something far worse. Something unsettling and horrifying that I wish I had never learned. The previous owners were the Morrison family. Parents, 2 children, and a grandmother. They moved into the house in the early 2000s, full of the same hope I had felt. Within 18 months, all 5 of them were dead. Carbon monoxide leak, the official report said. They died in their sleep, painless, quick, but neighbors reported something strange in the weeks before their deaths. The Morrisons had complained about voices, whispers in the night, names being called. They told people the house knew things it should not know, knew their names, knew their secrets, knew their fears. I found this information on local historical websites and old newspaper archives. The details were sparse but chilling. No one wanted to talk about the Morrison family. The house had been on the market ever since, passed between banks and investment companies. Sitting empty and waiting for someone like me. After learning this, I should have packed my bags and disappeared. But something kept me there. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the part of me that still wanted to believe grief was just making me paranoid. Maybe it was something else. Something the house wanted. The whispers grew more frequent. Every night, multiple voices now. Sarah's voice. The child calling for Emma. A man's deep voice speaking words I could not quite understand. And new ones. Voices that seemed to know me. That spoke about things only I should know. My childhood, my regrets, my darkest thoughts. I started recording everything. I set up my phone to capture audio while I slept. What I heard when I played back those recordings made me physically sick. Clear, distinct voices, dozens of them, speaking my name, discussing me, talking about me like I was not even there, or like I was already dead. The most disturbing recording came on the 13th night. I woke at 3:17 in the morning to the sound of footsteps in the attic above my bedroom. Slow, deliberate steps, back and forth, like someone pacing. I grabbed my phone and started recording. The footsteps continued for 7 minutes. Then they stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard breathing, right next to my ear, close enough that I should have felt breath on my skin. The recording caught it perfectly. Deep, raspy breathing. And then, in a voice that was not Sarah's, but somehow still hers, it said, "We have been waiting for you, David." I ran, not out of the house, but to the attic. I do not know what possessed me to go toward the danger instead of away from it. Fear does strange things to logic. The attic door was locked from the inside. I could see light coming from underneath, flickering like candlelight. I kicked the door open. The attic was empty. No candles, no light source, just dust and old furniture covered in sheets. But on the floor, written in that dust, were names. Dozens of names. Some I recognized from my research on the house. Morrison family members, names from even earlier, people who had lived in the house going back over 100 years. And there, at the end of the list, freshly written as if by an invisible finger, was my name, David. And below it, a date. Tomorrow's date. That is when the true horror hit me. This was not a haunting. This was something far worse. The house was not just remembering the dead. It was collecting them, recording them. Every person who had died within these walls, their voices, their identities, somehow trapped and preserved. And it wanted me next. I tried to leave that night, packed a bag, grabbed my keys, ran to my car. The engine would not start. I tried my phone. No signal. I had checked it an hour earlier and had full bars. Now, nothing. The house was not going to let me go. I spent that night barricaded in my bedroom, listening to the whispers grow louder. They were not threatening. That was the most unsettling part. They sounded almost comforting, welcoming, like old friends inviting me to join them. Sarah's voice was there, clearer than ever, telling me not to be afraid, telling me it was peaceful here, telling me to just let go. When morning came, I was still alive. The date on the attic floor had been wrong, or I had misread it. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. But the whispers did not stop. They continued every night, growing more insistent, more personal, more terrifying. I am still in the house. It has been 3 weeks since I tried to leave. My car still will not start. My phone still has no signal. I have walked to the main road twice, trying to flag down help, but no cars ever come. The forest seems to go on forever now, like the world beyond this property has simply ceased to exist. Last night, I heard a new voice. My own, speaking from somewhere deep in the walls, having a conversation with Sarah, this voice, discussing memories I have not thought about in years, laughing at jokes only we would understand. It sounded so real, so alive, like we were both already part of whatever this place is. I do not know how much longer I have. I do not know if anyone will ever hear this, but I need you to understand something. If you ever find yourself looking at a house that seems too good to be true, that sits empty for no clear reason, that feels wrong in ways you cannot quite explain, listen to that feeling. Listen to that fear. Because some places do not just remember the dead. Some places keep them, trap them, add them to a collection of voices that will whisper forever in the darkness. And if you ever hear your name called in the night by someone who should not be there, do not answer. Do not investigate. Run. Run as far and as fast as you can. Because once the house knows your name, it will never forget. And eventually, it will make sure you never leave. I can hear them now. All of them. Calling my name. Telling me it is time. The shadow in the corner of my room is growing darker. More solid. More real. And Sarah, its voice is the loudest of all. Telling me she has missed me. Telling me we can finally be together again. Maybe she is right. Maybe this is not so terrifying after all. Maybe this is just going home. Or maybe that is exactly what the house wants me to think. Story 5. Footprints in the Snow. A horrifying true account. Listen. I need to tell you what happened to me in Pennsylvania, because nobody else will. The state police certainly will not. What I discovered in that abandoned house is something that keeps me awake at 3 in the morning, drenched in sweat, staring at my ceiling and wondering if I am losing my mind or if something far worse is true. It started on a Tuesday in November, right before the first real snow. I was driving Interstate 80 through the Pocono Mountains, heading home after visiting my sister in New York. The road was empty, mile after mile of dark forest on both sides, the kind of highway that makes you feel small and alone, even though you are traveling in the middle of America. I remember thinking about how isolated these mountains were, how a person could disappear out here and nobody would know for weeks. That is when I saw the sign for the garage. It was a creepy, faded red billboard advertising Marcelo S. Auto Repair, a place that had clearly been abandoned for decades. The paint was peeling. The image of a smiling mechanic stared down at me with hollow, painted eyes. Something about that smile disturbed me immediately. I cannot explain it. I just knew I did not want to look at it. I kept driving. An hour later, I had to stop for gas. The nearest town was Port Clinton, barely a dot on the map. The gas station was a lonely place. One old pump, a small building with flickering lights, and nothing else around for miles. The cashier inside was a woman in her 60s who did not make eye contact when she handed me my change. When I asked her if anything interesting happened around here, she just stared at me with an expression I can only describe as pitying. She said nothing, just looked away. I left, unsettled. But I did not know yet. I had no idea what was waiting for me just 5 miles down that dark highway. The snow started falling heavier as evening approached. I was tired, thinking about stopping at a motel, when I spotted something that made me slow down. Off the road, barely visible through the trees, was a house. Not a normal house, an old Victorian structure, the kind of eerie, haunted building that looks wrong even in daylight. But in the darkness, with snow falling around it like ash, it looked like something from a nightmare. The windows were dark, the fence surrounding it was broken and leaning. Nobody had lived there in years. But then I saw the footprints. The snow was fresh, maybe an inch or 2 deep. The driveway was untouched white except for one thing, a clear, unmistakable set of human footprints leading from the road directly toward the house. Boot prints, large, deep. Someone had walked from the highway straight to that terrifying structure, probably within the last hour. I should have driven past. I should have forgotten about it and found a motel. But something in me wanted to know. I wanted to understand why someone would walk out here in the freezing dark. I wanted to know why every instinct in my body was screaming at me to leave. I parked my car off the road and walked toward the house. The footprints were easy to follow in the snow. They were spaced wide apart, like whoever made them was walking with purpose, not struggling. Not dragging, just walking, straight toward that creepy, horrifying Victorian house. I followed them. My heart was pounding. The wind was picking up, and the snow was falling faster now, beginning to cover the prints even as I walked. The house loomed larger as I approached. Up close, it was worse. The wood was rotting. The shutters hung from broken hinges. The front door was cracked open. And there, in front of that door, the footprints stopped. They did not lead away from the house. They did not circle it. They simply ended at the entrance, as if whoever made them had stepped directly into that darkness and vanished. The prints were so clear, so defined, that I could see where the person had stood for a moment before entering. The snow around the prints was disturbed slightly, like the person had shifted their weight, hesitating before going inside. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a minute. The disturbing realization was crawling up my spine. There were no footprints coming back out. I should have called the police right then. I should have gone back to my car and driven away. But the horror of it, the sheer wrongness of that moment, paralyzed me. I just stood there, staring at those prints and that open door, wondering if someone was inside. Wondering if they needed help. Wondering if they were even alive. The door creaked in the wind. A sound drifted out from inside the house. I cannot describe it perfectly, but it was like wind moving through empty spaces, like the house was breathing. The eerie atmosphere intensified as I stood at that threshold. I pushed the door open. The inside was absolute darkness at first, but as my eyes adjusted, I could make out the shape of an entryway. There was a staircase leading up, barely visible in the dim light that filtered through the broken windows. The floor was covered in debris. Pieces of plaster, old papers, dust so thick it was like walking on a cushion. My footprints were clearly visible in it, and there were other footprints, fresh ones, the same boots that had walked from the road. They led deeper into the house, into the darkness. The chilling feeling intensified with every step I took. The air inside was ice cold, colder than it should have been outside. I could see my breath. I could hear the house settling and groaning around me, and underneath that, something else. A sound that might have been water running, or wind, or something I could not identify. I followed the footprints through what had once been a living room. Furniture remained, but it was covered in a layer of dust so thick it looked like snow. A chair sat in the center of the room, facing the window. On the chair, visible only because it was slightly newer than everything else, was an indentation. Someone had sat there, recently. The dust had been disturbed. How long had this person been sitting in that chair, looking out that window? The footprints continued toward the back of the house, into a hallway. The darkness grew deeper. I was using my phone light now, a small circle illuminating only what was directly in front of me. The phone light felt inadequate. It felt like I was standing in a zone of pure nightmare. The footprints led to a doorway, a basement door. It was open. At this point, something inside me was screaming to leave. This is where people died in horror stories. This is where the protagonist made the mistake they would regret for the rest of their life. But I was not thinking clearly anymore. I was caught in a terrifying compulsion to know what was down there, to understand what had drawn that person into this house and into that basement. I went down the stairs. The basement was different from the rest of the house. It was not empty. There was something arranged down there, a space that had been prepared. The eerie darkness seemed to have a weight to it, pressing down on me as I descended. At the bottom of the stairs, I stood completely still, trying to process what I was seeing. There was a cot, a sleeping cot, set up in the center of the basement. Next to it was a lantern, recently used. Nearby was a notebook. On the walls, covering nearly every surface, were photographs. Hundreds of them, pinned, taped, stapled. All of them showed the same thing, my car. Not my specific car, cars like mine, a dark sedan. Every angle, every highway, different seasons, different locations. Dozens and dozens of photographs showing vehicles identical to mine on roads across Pennsylvania, New York, Ohio. The creepy collection was extensive, systematic, obsessive. And below each photograph, in shaking handwriting, were notes, dates, times, mile markers, observations. Some notes were longer, rambling. Others were just single words. Alone, followed, where, why, help, stop. I picked up the notebook with shaking hands. My fear was turning into something colder, more primal. The pages were filled with dates going back months. April, May, June, all the way to yesterday. The entries became increasingly disturbing as the dates grew more recent. They talked about watching, about waiting, about understanding, about becoming. The final entry, dated yesterday, read only this: the car has returned. It is running again. The hunter has returned to the hunting ground. It arrives every 72 hours. This time I will know what to do. This time I will not run. I threw the notebook down and bolted for the stairs. The eerie atmosphere of the house suddenly felt alive, like it was actively trying to trap me. The darkness seemed to follow me. Every step up the stairs felt wrong, like the house was stretching, getting longer, pulling the exit farther away. I made it out of the basement and through the house. I did not look at the footprints anymore. I did not care about them. I just needed to get outside, into the open air, away from that horrible place. I was out the door and running toward the road when I heard it. A sound from inside the house. Not wind, not settling boards. A sound like someone taking a deep breath. A gasp, like something was waking up. I did not stop running until I reached my car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I managed to start the engine, and I drove. I did not turn around. I did not look in the mirror. I just accelerated onto the highway and drove until the house was completely out of sight. I called the state police from the next town. I told them what I had found. They said someone would investigate. I gave them detailed directions. I explained about the photographs, the notebook, the footprints. The officer on the phone just listened. He did not ask many questions. The next morning, I called back. The officer told me they had sent someone out to the location. The house was empty. There was nobody there. When I asked about the footprints, the notebook, the photographs, he said there was nothing like that. The basement was empty except for old boxes and debris. There was nothing to suggest anyone had been living there. I know what I saw. I know those photographs existed. I know someone was in that house. But here's the part that terrifies me most. The part that wakes me at 3 in the morning. I've been driving across Pennsylvania, New York, and Ohio regularly for work. My job involves traveling the same routes over and over. The same highways, the same stretches of road. And I have started to notice things. My car has been parked in different places than where I left it. Not always, but sometimes. My odometer reading is off by miles I did not drive. Last week, I found a photograph on my passenger seat. It was me, sleeping in my car at a rest stop. I do not remember taking a nap at a rest stop. The handwriting on the back of the photograph is shaky and familiar. It simply said, "Still watching. Getting closer. Almost time." I do not know what this means. I do not know who is doing this, but I know that whoever or whatever was in that house is no longer confined to that location. And I have a horrifying suspicion that I am no longer the only one involved. Every time I drive now, I check my mirrors obsessively. I look for footprints in snow at rest stops. I check my car for signs of entry. I never sleep while parked. But I know it is only a matter of time, because this morning, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My odometer showed I had driven an extra 180 miles overnight, even though my car was locked and I was asleep inside my house. Someone had driven my car while I slept. When I looked out my window at dawn, there were fresh footprints in the snow outside my bedroom window. One set of prints walked from the driveway to my window, and then they simply ended. They did not walk away. They stopped right there, right outside where I was sleeping. The prints were still there when I woke up, clear and sharp in the fresh snow. And they were not facing away from the house. They were facing inward, toward me, like something had been standing there, outside my window, looking in at me while I slept. And the unsettling part, the truly terrifying realization that has stripped away any remaining sanity I possess, is that the footprints are smaller than the ones I followed in Pennsylvania. The prints outside my window are mine. Story 6. House that doesn't exist. I want you to imagine something truly terrifying. You are driving down a lonely country road in rural Pennsylvania, and you see a house that should not be there. A house that has no address, no history, no record of ever being built. A house that appears on no map. Now imagine walking inside and realizing that time itself has stopped obeying the rules. This is not fiction. This happened to me 3 weeks ago, and I still cannot explain what I experienced in that place. My name is irrelevant now. What matters is that I am a real estate appraiser. I have spent 17 years measuring properties, checking records, and documenting homes across eastern Pennsylvania. I have seen abandoned farmhouses, forgotten mill buildings, and properties left to decay for decades. But nothing in my career prepared me for what I found on County Road 413, 7 miles outside the town of Millbrook. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late October. A man named Gerald Hutchins contacted my office asking for an appraisal on a property he claimed to have inherited from a distant relative. He provided coordinates instead of an address, which seemed unusual but not unheard of for rural land. The coordinates pointed to a forested area I had driven past dozens of times. I had never noticed any structure there. Still, the job paid well, and I needed the work. I drove out that afternoon under a sky the color of old concrete. The autumn leaves had turned brown and brittle, carpeting the roadside in a layer of decay that crunched beneath my tires as I pulled onto the shoulder. The GPS confirmed I had reached the coordinates. I stepped out of my truck and felt the temperature drop immediately. The air tasted metallic, like pennies dissolving on my tongue. The woods ahead looked darker than they should have been at 2 in the afternoon. I grabbed my equipment bag and headed into the trees. The forest was unnaturally quiet. No birds sang, no insects buzzed, even my footsteps seemed muffled, as though the earth itself was absorbing sound. After walking about 300 yards through thick underbrush, I saw it. A 2-story colonial-style house standing in a small clearing, its white paint peeling in long strips that curled away from the wood like dead skin. The sight of it felt wrong immediately. This was state forest land. No private structures should exist here. I pulled out my tablet and checked the property database. Nothing. I switched to satellite view. The clearing showed only trees. I zoomed in further. Still nothing. According to every official record, I was standing in front of empty woods. But the house was real. I could see it. I could smell the rot coming from its sagging porch. Something cold crawled down my spine. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. But I am a professional. I had been hired to do a job. I approached the front door, my boots heavy on the creaking steps. The door hung slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The interior smelled of mildew and something else. Something sweet and wrong, like fruit left to ferment in darkness. The front hallway stretched ahead of me, ending at a staircase that climbed into shadow. Wallpaper decorated with faded roses covered the walls, bulging in places where moisture had separated it from the plaster. I clicked on my flashlight. The beam cut through dusty air thick enough to choke on. I began documenting the first floor. Living room to the left, dining room to the right, kitchen toward the back. Standard layout. Nothing unusual except for the complete absence of furniture or personal belongings. The house felt staged, like a set built for a purpose I could not understand. I took measurements, snapped photos, and made notes. Everything appeared normal, but my watch had stopped working. I tapped the face. The second hand remained frozen at the 7. I checked my phone. No signal, which was expected out here, but the clock displayed the same time as my watch. 2:17. I had entered the house at 2:15. Only 2 minutes had passed, yet I felt like I had been inside much longer. I shook off the unease and continued working. The kitchen contained an old cast iron sink and a wood-burning stove, both covered in a layer of grime that suggested decades of neglect. I opened the cabinets. Empty. I checked the drawers. Empty. I moved toward the back door and noticed something that made my blood turn cold. Footprints in the dust on the floor. Fresh footprints. Multiple sets, all leading deeper into the house. None leading out. My heart began to hammer. I was not alone. Someone else had been here recently. Maybe they were still here. I called out, my voice sounding hollow and strange in the empty rooms. No response. Only the settling groan of old wood and the whisper of wind finding its way through gaps in the walls. I should have left then. But curiosity, that terrible human weakness, pushed me forward. I climbed the stairs. Each step released a groan that echoed through the house like a warning. The second-floor hallway stretched before me, lined with closed doors. 4 on each side. I opened the first door on the right. A bedroom. Empty except for rectangles of cleaner floor where furniture once stood. I moved to the next room. Same thing. The third room. The fourth. All empty. All identical in their abandonment. The last door on the left resisted when I tried the handle. Locked from the inside, I pressed my ear against the wood and heard something that made my skin crawl. Breathing. Slow and steady, like someone sleeping. But the sound came from everywhere at once, as though the house itself was drawing breath. I stepped back. The door remained closed. The breathing continued. I checked my watch again. Still 2:17. My phone showed the same time. I had been inside the house for at least 30 minutes, moving from room to room, climbing stairs, investigating empty spaces. But time had not moved forward. It had stopped completely, or I had stepped outside of it somehow. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I needed to leave immediately. I turned toward the stairs and froze. The hallway had changed. The doors were different now. 5 on each side instead of 4. The walls seemed closer together, the ceiling lower. The wallpaper pattern had shifted from roses to something that looked like faces screaming in floral arrangements. I blinked hard. The hallway remained altered. This was not possible. Houses did not change their layouts. But this house was not following normal rules. Fear flooded through me, sharp and chemical. I ran for the stairs. My footsteps thundered on the floorboards as I descended into the first floor hallway. But the hallway was longer now. Much longer. The front door, which should have been 20 feet away, stretched into the distance like a tunnel. I kept running. My lungs burned. My legs ached. The door came no closer. I stopped, gasping for air. Think. I forced myself to think clearly through the panic. This was not real. It could not be real. Houses had fixed dimensions. Space did not expand. Time did not freeze. These were fundamental truths. But I was experiencing something beyond those truths, something that defied rational explanation. I was trapped inside a structure that existed outside normal reality. I tried the windows, all sealed shut, the glass thick and clouded as though coated in years of accumulated grime. I grabbed a chair from the dining room and hurled it at the nearest window. The chair bounced off the glass and clattered to the floor. Not even a crack appeared. I tried again. Same result. The windows were unbreakable, or I had become too weak to break them, or the house would not permit me to leave. That last thought terrified me more than anything else. The house had intention. It had purpose. It had drawn me here and now held me prisoner for reasons I could not comprehend. I thought about Gerald Hutchins, the man who hired me. Had he known? Was he real? Or was he just bait dangled to lure someone inside this impossible place? I searched for another exit. The back door in the kitchen opened easily, revealing not the outside but another hallway. This one had doors spaced irregularly along both walls, some hanging open to expose rooms that defied geometry. One contained a staircase that descended into darkness. Another showed a bedroom identical to the ones upstairs, except the window looked out onto a brick wall inches from the glass. A third room appeared to be the living room I had documented earlier, but smaller, compressed, as though viewed through the wrong end of a telescope. I was lost inside a house that was larger on the inside than the outside. A house that rearranged itself. A house that consumed time. The horror of my situation crystallized into a single terrible certainty. People had been here before me. Those footprints in the dust. Those fresh tracks that led deeper but never out. They had become lost just as I was lost now. And they had never escaped. I do not know how long I wandered through that shifting maze. My watch remained frozen. My phone died at some point, the battery draining impossibly fast. I walked through hallways that curved back on themselves, climbed stairs that led to the same floor I had left, opened doors that revealed rooms I had already searched. The house played with me. It showed me glimpses of the outside world through windows, then sealed those windows shut when I approached. It created sounds, footsteps and voices and music, all designed to draw me deeper into its impossible interior. Thirst became my constant companion. Hunger followed close behind. But worse than physical discomfort was the growing understanding that I might die here, that I might become another ghost wandering these endless rooms forever. The house fed on something. Maybe it fed on time stolen from its victims. Maybe it fed on fear and confusion and despair. Whatever its nourishment, I was providing it abundantly. Then I found the room with the photographs. A small study tucked away behind a door that appeared without warning in a previously blank wall. The walls were covered in framed pictures, hundreds of them, showing the house in different eras. Some looked recent, crisp color photos showing the structure as I had first seen it. Others were faded black and white images from decades past. But in every photograph, the house stood in that clearing, unchanged and unchanging, a fixed point across generations. And in some of the older photos, I saw people, men and women standing on the porch, staring at the camera with expressions that ranged from confusion to terror. I recognized the clothing from different time periods, 1920s, 1950s, 1980s, all the way up to recent years. All of them looking like they had stumbled upon the house by accident. All of them trapped in that single moment, preserved forever in photographic emulsion. Would my picture join this collection? Would someone find my image here decades from now and wonder who I was and what happened to me? The thought was unbearable. I tore through the room looking for anything useful, any clue about how to escape. I found journals written by previous visitors, their handwriting deteriorating from neat script to desperate scrawl as time stretched and sanity frayed. I found sketches of the house layout, each one different, each one useless because the house never stayed the same. And then I found the note, a single sheet of paper lying on the desk, the ink still wet as though someone had written it moments before. It contained 3 words in shaky handwriting. Follow the cold. I did not understand immediately. But as I stood there reading and rereading that cryptic message, I noticed the temperature. The room was warm, almost stuffy. But I remembered the cold I had felt outside, and the metallic taste of the air when I first approached. Cold had been my first warning that something was wrong. Maybe cold was also the way out. I left the study and began searching for the coldest parts of the house. I followed drafts and temperature drops, moving through rooms and hallways with renewed purpose. The house resisted. It showed me warm, inviting spaces. It created heat that drove me back. But I persisted, and eventually I found it. A narrow door beneath the main staircase, a space I had passed dozens of times without noticing. The air around it was frigid. My breath came out in visible clouds. I opened the door, darkness beyond, and a descending staircase. Cold air rushed up from below, carrying that same metallic taste I had experienced outside. This was wrong. This was dangerous. But it was also different from everything else in the house, and different meant possibility. I stepped through and began descending. The stairs went down much farther than they should have. The house was only 2 stories above ground, but I counted over 100 steps before reaching the bottom. The cold intensified with each step until my fingers were numb and my face ached. I emerged into a vast basement that should not have existed, a space carved from raw earth and stone, stretching away into darkness beyond the reach of my dying flashlight. And there, at the center of that impossible room, I saw the source. A thing that looked like a door frame standing unsupported, made from wood so old it had turned black. The frame vibrated with energy I could feel in my teeth. The space within the frame showed nothing, a darkness deeper than the surrounding shadows. But the cold emanated from it in waves, and I understood with absolute certainty that this was the way out. Not back to the world I knew, but through to somewhere else. Somewhere the house could not follow. I had no choice. I stepped through the frame. Reality inverted. I fell through freezing darkness that burned like fire. Time rushed past me in both directions simultaneously. I saw centuries collapse and expand. I saw the house being built and destroyed and built again in an endless cycle. I saw the people who had entered before me, still trapped, still wandering, their spirits bound to those twisting hallways forever. And then I saw nothing at all. I woke up in my truck on the side of County Road 413. The sun was setting. My watch showed 7:30 in the evening. 5 hours had passed since I arrived, though I have no memory of how I got back to my vehicle. My equipment bag sat beside me, everything accounted for except my phone and camera. The photos I had taken were gone. The measurements I had recorded were gone. I had no proof of anything I had experienced. I drove into Millbrook and asked about Gerald Hutchins. No one had heard of him. I searched property records again. Nothing. I returned to the coordinates the next day in full daylight. The clearing was empty, just trees and undergrowth, no sign any structure had ever stood there. I have been back 7 times since. The house has never appeared again. But sometimes, late at night, I still feel that cold. I taste metal in my mouth, and I wonder if I really escaped, or if I am still wandering those hallways, trapped in a frozen moment while my body sits empty behind the wheel of a truck that will never start. I wonder if this reality is the dream and that house was the truth. Most terrifying of all, I wonder what happened to the others. Those people in the photographs, those footprints in the dust. Are they still there, lost in rooms that shift and change, stealing seconds that stretch into eternity? The house exists. It has no address, no owner, and no record. But it waits in the Pennsylvania woods for the next person to find it. And when they do, time will stop, space will lie, and they will learn the same horrible truth I did. Some doors should never be opened. Some places should never be found. And some houses were never meant for the living at all. Story 7. Room that never ages. The toys in that Pennsylvania house have not collected a single grain of dust in 40 years. And I know this because I measured it myself with equipment that does not lie. My name is Marcus Webb, and I used to restore historic properties across the Northeast. Old mansions, forgotten estates, buildings with stories buried in their bones. I had seen decay in every form, water damage, structural collapse, black mold turning walls into living nightmares. But I had never seen anything like the house on Millbrook Road until the county hired me to assess it for demolition in the fall of 2023. The place had been abandoned since 1983. 40 years of Pennsylvania winters and summers, of rain and snow and humidity. 40 years of nature reclaiming what humans left behind. The county records showed a family named the Hendersons had lived there. Parents and 2 children. Then one day they were simply gone. No forwarding address. No death certificates. No paper trail of any kind. The house sat empty while the world moved on, taxes unpaid, ownership in legal limbo, until finally the county decided to tear it down and sell the land. That was supposed to be my job. Survey the damage, document the hazards, recommend demolition. Simple work. I had done it 100 times. But nothing about that house was simple. I arrived on a gray October morning when fog hung thick between the trees lining the property. The house was a 2-story colonial, once white but now streaked with green algae and brown water stains. The roof sagged in the middle. Gutters hung loose. Windows were dark and empty like the eyes of something dead. The yard had become a wilderness of waist-high weeds and volunteer trees pushing through cracked concrete. I walked through the front door and entered a world of rot. The smell hit me first. Mildew and decay, and that particular stench of abandonment that gets into your lungs and stays there. The living room furniture had collapsed into shapeless masses covered in mold. The kitchen cabinets had warped and split. Water damage had turned the ceiling into a landscape of brown continents and black archipelagos. Every surface crawled with spores and fungi. Every floorboard groaned with moisture and age. This was normal. This was expected. This was what 40 years of neglect looked like. Then I went upstairs. The second-floor hallway was in the same condition as everything else. Wallpaper peeling in long strips. Carpet rotted through to the subfloor. Bathroom fixtures rusted and stained. The master bedroom was a horror show of collapsed plaster and exposed beams. But the room at the end of the hall was different. The door was closed. I turned the knob and pushed it open, and the smell of decay vanished. The air inside was clean, fresh, almost sweet. It was a child's bedroom, and it looked like the family had left yesterday. 2 small beds with matching blue quilts, perfectly made. A bookshelf filled with children's books, spines straight and colors bright. A wooden toy box in the corner, lid closed. Curtains hanging crisp and clean over the window. A rug on the floor showing no signs of age or wear. Posters on the walls, images sharp and unfaded. A small desk with crayons arranged in a neat rainbow line. No dust, no mold, no decay, nothing. I stood in the doorway feeling my skin crawl with a fear I could not name. This was impossible. This violated every law of physics and biology I understood. A room cannot remain pristine while the building around it crumbles. Air circulates. Moisture seeps. Mold spores are everywhere. Time touches everything. Except this room. I pulled out my phone and took pictures. Then I retrieved my testing equipment from the truck. Moisture meter, air quality sensor, infrared thermometer. Professional tools that gave objective readings. The moisture content in the walls of the hallway read 30%. Dangerously high. The room at the end showed 8%. Bone dry. The temperature in the hallway was 56 degrees. The room was exactly 72. The air quality in the hallway showed high levels of mold spores and volatile organic compounds. The room showed cleaner air than outside. The room had its own atmosphere, its own climate, its own rules. I should have left. Every instinct screamed at me to get out of that house and never come back. But I needed to understand. I needed to know what was happening here. So I stepped inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, I felt it. A presence. Not hostile, but aware. Watching. Waiting. The room knew I was there. I walked to the bookshelf and pulled out a volume. The Velveteen Rabbit. Copyright 1983. The pages were crisp and white. No yellowing. No brittleness. I opened the toy box. Inside were action figures and dolls and building blocks, all in perfect condition. Colors bright. Joints tight. No degradation whatsoever. On the desk I found a drawing. 2 stick figures holding hands under a smiling sun. Written in crayon at the bottom were 2 names. Tommy and Sarah, the Henderson children. I opened the desk drawer. Inside was a notebook, the kind elementary school kids use. I flipped through the pages. Math problems, spelling words, and on the last page with writing, a sentence that made my blood freeze. We are staying here forever now. The handwriting was a child. Uneven letters, uncertain spacing, but the words were clear. I heard something behind me, a soft sound, like breathing. I turned. The room was empty, but one of the beds had changed. The quilt was pulled back slightly, as if someone had just gotten out. I knew it had been smoothed before. I had photographed it. My hand started shaking. I backed toward the door, eyes locked on that disturbed bed. The air in the room felt thicker, harder to breathe. The presence I had sensed before was stronger now. Closer. I reached the doorway and stumbled into the hallway. The smell of rot returned instantly. I pulled the door closed and stood there gasping, my heart hammering against my ribs. I left the house, sat in my truck for an hour trying to rationalize what I had seen. Maybe the room had been sealed somehow. Maybe there was an explanation involving air pressure and humidity and variables I had not considered. Maybe I was tired, stressed, seeing things that were not there. But I knew the truth. That room was wrong. That room was not bound by the same laws as the rest of reality. And something was living in it. I should have reported my findings and walked away. Instead, I came back that night. I needed to see what happened after dark. I needed to know if the impossible room would reveal its secrets in the darkness. I parked down the road and approached the house with a flashlight and a camera. The moon was hidden behind clouds. The only sound was wind moving through dead trees. I went straight upstairs, straight to that door at the end of the hall. I opened it. The room was exactly as I had left it. Perfect, untouched. But now I could see light coming from under the closet door. Faint, flickering, like candlelight. I crossed the room. My footsteps made no sound on the rug. I reached for the closet door handle. It was cold, so cold it burned my palm. I opened it. The closet was not a closet. It was a doorway. Beyond it, I could see another room. And another beyond that, an impossible series of spaces stretching back into a distance that should not fit inside the house. Each room was a child, its bedroom. Each one perfect and preserved. Each one occupied. I saw them. Children, dozens of them. Different ages, different eras, different styles of clothing and toys. Some from the 1980s like Tommy and Sarah. Some from earlier, the 1960s, the 1940s. Maybe older. They sat on beds or played with toys or stood at windows looking out at views that were not Pennsylvania. They did not look at me. They did not acknowledge my presence. They simply existed in their frozen perfect moments, trapped in rooms that would never age, never change, never let them go. I understood then. The house was not haunted. The house was hungry. It had been taking children for decades, maybe longer, pulling them out of time and keeping them in these preserved spaces. Not dead, not alive, just here, forever. And I had opened the door. One of the children turned to look at me. A girl, maybe 8 years old, wearing a dress from the 1950s. Her eyes were empty, not cruel, not sad, just empty. She raised one hand and pointed at me. The other children turned, all of them, dozens of faces, hundreds maybe, in rooms stretching back beyond my sight, all looking at me, all pointing. The room began to change. The walls started closing in. The temperature dropped. Frost formed on the windows. The toys in the box began moving on their own, lifting into the air, circling the room like debris in a tornado. The house wanted me. The house wanted to add me to its collection. One more soul trapped in one more perfect room, preserved forever in a moment that would never end. I ran, through the pointing children, through the impossible closet, back into the real bedroom. I slammed the closet door shut and heard it lock from the inside. The sound of a prison closing. I sprinted down the hallway, down the stairs, out the front door. I did not stop running until I reached my truck. I drove away with my headlights off, not wanting the house to follow me with its gaze. I filed my report the next morning. Recommended immediate demolition due to structural instability and hazardous conditions. I did not mention the room. I did not mention the children. Who would believe me? What could anyone do? The county tore the house down 2 weeks later. I watched from a distance as the excavators ripped it apart. When they got to the second floor, when they demolished that end of the hallway, I saw something fall from the wreckage. A blue quilt, still perfect, still clean, untouched by the violence of the demolition. It landed in the rubble and lay there like an accusation. The construction crew cleared the debris and graded the lot. The land was sold. Someone is building a new house there now. A nice modern home for a young family with children. I drive by sometimes. I cannot help myself. I need to see. I need to know if it is really over. Last week I drove past at night. The new house is almost finished. And in one of the upstairs windows, I saw a light. Faint, flickering, like a candle. The room is still there. Somewhere, waiting, hungry. And the children are still playing in their perfect preserved spaces, trapped in a nightmare that will never end, in a house that can never truly be destroyed. Because some places are not built on land. They are built on something older. Something that exists outside of time and space and human understanding. Some places are doorways, and once you open them, they never fully close. I know this now. I learned it in that room at the end of the hall. The room that never ages. The room that takes and keeps and never gives back. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear them, the children, calling from their frozen perfect prisons, asking why no one comes to take them home. But there is no home for them anymore. There is only the room. Forever. Story 8. Pennsylvania house with a phone still ringing. I have been afraid to tell anyone about this. Not because they would not believe me, but because saying it out loud might make it real. What happened to me in that house was terrifying, unsettling, and deeply disturbing. It continues to haunt me every single day. I need to tell someone what I found inside that place, what I discovered about the future, and what I realized about time itself. This is the chilling account of the worst night of my life. It started on a gray October morning when I was driving through rural Pennsylvania. I had taken a job as an insurance appraiser, which meant spending my days inspecting abandoned properties across the state. The pay was decent enough, and the work was simple. Look at the building, photograph the damage, assess the value, and move on to the next one. I had done this hundreds of times before. Nothing about that day seemed different as I pulled onto the cracked gravel driveway of an old Victorian house sitting on the edge of a dense forest. The property had been empty for decades, according to the documents I had been given. The owners had disappeared without explanation in 1987. No one had lived here since. The house was creepy in that classic way. Peeling white paint hung from the wooden siding like dead skin. The windows were dark and empty, staring at me like hollow eyes. Vines strangled the porch railing. The air felt heavy around the property, unnaturally quiet except for the wind pushing through the bare branches of the surrounding trees. Something about the place made me deeply uneasy from the moment I stepped out of my car. I felt watched, as if invisible eyes were tracking my every movement. The sensation made the hair on my arms stand up, but I pushed the feeling aside. I was a professional. I had seen dozens of haunted-looking properties before. This was just an old house. That was what I told myself. The front door was locked, so I used the key that had been provided by the real estate company managing the property. The door swung open with a long, horrifying creak. The smell that came out nearly made me gag. Rot, mold, and something else. Something organic and deeply disturbing. Like decay itself had a smell, and that was it. The interior was dark. Dust particles floated in thin beams of light that came through cracks in the boarded windows. I turned on my flashlight and began my inspection. Furniture covered in gray cloth sat in the living room. A grand piano occupied one corner, its lid closed, gathering decades of dust. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Nothing seemed to suggest the eerie nature of what I would soon discover. I worked systematically through the ground floor, taking photographs and notes. Each room was heavy with stillness, with absence, with the crushing weight of time passing slowly in a place where nothing moved. Nothing changed. Nothing happened. The kitchen had old appliances from the early 1980s. Plates still sat in the sink, though they were now just brown shapes covered in mold. The dining room had a table set for a meal that no one had ever eaten. The forks and knives were still positioned neatly on either side of the plates. Someone had sat down to eat here and simply never come back. The thought of it, the incompleteness of it, made me feel unsettled and deeply afraid. Upstairs was where things began to feel wrong. The second-floor hallway was narrow and dark. My flashlight beam cut through the shadow, illuminating dust that hung in the air like fog. Doors lined both sides of the hallway, all of them closed. Some of them seemed to have something inside them. I could feel it, not anything visible, but a presence, an energy, a wrongness that made my skin crawl. I opened each door methodically. Bedrooms filled with old furniture, a bathroom with a clawfoot tub and cracked mirror, a small sewing room with an ancient Singer machine and baskets of old fabric. Nothing terrifying, nothing obviously dangerous, and yet my fear was growing. My heart was beating faster. My breathing felt shallow and forced. It was the last door at the end of the hallway that changed everything. When I opened it, I found what appeared to be a study or small office. A wooden desk sat against one wall. Shelves lined with old books occupied another wall. In the corner of the room, on an antique nightstand, sat an old rotary telephone. Cream-colored, probably from the 1970s. Just as I was photographing the room, the phone rang. The ringing sound filled that creepy, silent house like an explosion. It was so sudden, so unexpected, that I actually jumped backward. My heart was hammering in my chest. The phone kept ringing, that horrible, mechanical sound echoing through the dusty darkness. I stared at it. No one lived here. The electricity should not have been connected. I had checked the main panel downstairs. The house had been shut down for years. And yet that terrifying phone was ringing. I did not want to answer it. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to get out of that house, to run, to escape whatever was happening. But I stood there, frozen, listening to the phone ring again and again. The sound was hypnotic, pulling me closer. My hand moved without my conscious decision to move it. I reached out and picked up the heavy handset. For a moment there was nothing but silence. Then I heard breathing, not on the other end of the line, but my own. Heavy, frightened, desperate breathing. There was no voice. No one spoke, but I felt the presence of something on the other end. Something aware, something watching through the telephone line. Then, slowly, numbers appeared on the small display screen of the phone. An LED readout showing a date and time. It read 3:47 p.m., March 15th, 2034. I dropped the phone. For years I have tried to rationalize what I saw. A malfunction. A trick of the light. A hallucination caused by something in the air. Perhaps carbon monoxide or some chemical released from the old materials of the house. But I know what I saw. I know it was real. And I know what happened next was even more horrifying. I picked the phone back up with a trembling hand. The display was now showing a different date. 3:49 p.m., October 22nd, 2037. As I watched, the numbers changed again. 2:15 a.m., June 3rd, 2041. The dates were jumping forward. Sometimes by days, sometimes by years, sometimes jumping backward. Decades of dates flickering across that haunting little screen like a clock counting towards something terrible. Then the phone in my hand began to ring again. I was holding it, and it rang inside my hand. Vibrating, alive. When I brought it to my ear, I heard a voice. Mine, my own voice. And it was screaming. The scream went on for what felt like forever. My voice, but wrong, distorted, filled with pain and terror and something worse. Desperation. The kind of desperation you feel when you have seen something that has broken your understanding of reality. When you have glimpsed something that should not exist. The scream ended, and there was silence again. The display now showed the current date, October 19th, 2024, exactly one day before I stood in that horrifying house. And then it showed the date I was standing in, October 20th, 2024, 3:47 p.m. The exact time displayed was matching the current time. It was showing me right now. It was showing my presence in that creepy, unsettling place. I put the phone down very carefully on the nightstand. My hands were shaking. My mind was struggling to understand what was happening. This was impossible. This was terrifying. This was a nightmare from which I could not wake. I left the study without taking any more photographs. I walked quickly down the dark hallway. I was afraid the phone would ring again. I was afraid I would hear my voice again. I was afraid of what that voice might say next. Downstairs, I threw the house key on the kitchen counter and ran for my car. I sat in the driver's seat with the doors locked, breathing heavily, trying to calm my racing heartbeat. The house stared at me through its dark windows. Silent, waiting, watching. I started the engine and drove away. I did not look in my rearview mirror until I was miles away. When I finally called the real estate company managing the property, I told them I could not complete the appraisal. I gave some excuse about the structural integrity being too compromised for safe inspection. They were not happy, but they accepted my refusal. I have never been back to that house. I have never told my employer about the phone. I have never filed a report about what happened. But I have not been able to stop thinking about it. The terrifying thing is not what the phone showed me. It is what I did not tell anyone. For 2 weeks after that day, I carefully researched properties owned by the realty company. I looked through their records. I discovered that they managed 12 properties across Pennsylvania. 12 properties that have been empty for decades. 12 properties that they purchased from the same person in 1987. The same year the family disappeared from that eerie house. I went back to my apartment and opened my laptop. I searched for missing persons in Pennsylvania from 1987. There were hundreds of cases, most never solved. But then I found a newspaper article from the local paper. Missing family of 5 from Victorian house in rural Pennsylvania. The dates matched perfectly. The father, mother, and 3 children had simply vanished from that creepy place on October 20th, 1987. Exactly 37 years before I had picked up that horrifying telephone. What the phone showed me was not the future. It was showing me the past, my present, and something far more disturbing. It was showing me dates that had not happened yet. Dates that might be my future. The screaming I heard on that chilling line was a warning. A message sent backward through time from someone? From something. Something aware. Something trapped. Because I have realized something since that unsettling day. Something that fills me with deep, constant dread. The phone rang at exactly the same time in every instance. 3:47 p.m. And the dates started in 1987 and went forward, year after year, decade after decade, continuing past today and into a future I will never see. The phone has been ringing for decades. It is still ringing, and according to the dates I saw on that nightstand, according to that terrifying display that showed time itself breaking down and becoming unstable, there are only certain dates left on that list. Certain dates that appear, then disappear. Certain dates where people vanish from that horrible Victorian house forever. I recently checked the company records again. They are selling the property next month. A contractor is scheduled to demolish the house on October 20th, 2034. Today is October 19th, 2026. That is 8 years away. And I keep thinking about the date I saw on that phone. October 20th, 2034. The same date when the house will be destroyed. The same date when the family disappeared. The same date when someone was meant to find that telephone and answer that chilling call. I am terrified that the phone will not stop ringing just because the house is gone. I am afraid that the ringing will follow, that the phone will appear somewhere else, somewhere I might find it. And when I pick it up again, I will hear my own voice screaming again. Older, more desperate, calling from a time I have not yet reached. Trapped in a loop of horror that stretches across decades. Because there is one more thing I have not told anyone. One final horrifying detail that keeps me awake at night. When I looked at those flickering dates on that unsettling LED screen, I saw my birthday listed there. Multiple times, scattered throughout the years, and the last time my birthday appeared on that nightmare display, it was crossed out. That date is October 19th, 2034. That is exactly 8 years from today. And I have no way of knowing if I will survive that long. I have no way of knowing what is waiting for me. All I know is that somewhere in rural Pennsylvania, a phone is still ringing. It has been ringing for decades. It will keep ringing, and sooner or later, someone will answer it. Story 9. House Pennsylvania police wouldn't talk about. I found the house by accident, and I wish to God I had never stopped my car that night. Let me be clear about something from the start. I am not a person who believes in the supernatural. I am not prone to paranoia or exaggeration. I work as a structural engineer in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and I deal in facts, measurements, and evidence. Everything I'm about to tell you is the truth as I experienced it. Whether you believe me matters less than you understanding what I am about to describe, because there is a terrifying reality hidden in plain sight in rural Pennsylvania, and the people who should be protecting us know exactly what it is. They just will not talk about it. It happened on Route 322, somewhere between Lewisburg and Bellefonte. I was driving back from a late job site inspection. My GPS had died miles back, and I was lost. The kind of lost where there are no streetlights, no phone signal, and the road itself seems to narrow and twist like something alive. This was in October, and the darkness came early and completely. My headlights were the only light in the world. That is when I saw it. The house appeared around a bend like something that had been waiting for me. It sat back from the road maybe 50 yards, perched on a small rise. What made me stop was not the house itself, but the blue light emanating from inside. Not the warm glow of a lamp or the flickering of a television. This was an odd, sickly blue that did not seem to come from any normal source. It pulsed, subtle, rhythmic, like something breathing. I should have kept driving. The driveway was barely visible, just a suggestion of crushed gravel disappearing into overgrown grass and weeds. The house was Victorian, the kind you see in Pennsylvania farm country, with peeling white paint and dark shutters hanging crooked from their hinges. The roof had partially collapsed on the east side. The windows on the ground floor were boarded up with water-stained plywood. But the second floor, the windows there were intact, and that is where the creepy blue light was coming from. All of them. Every window on the second floor was glowing that same unsettling color. My rational mind offered explanations. Old neon signs, reflected light from something else. A house that was actually occupied, and I was simply seeing it at an eerie angle. But my body knew better. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. My mouth had gone dry. Everything in my gut was screaming at me to turn around and leave this place behind. I did not listen. I parked at the end of the driveway and got out. The air was wrong. That is the only way I can describe it. It was not cold, exactly, although the October night should have been chilly. It was a kind of numbness, like stepping into a room where all the warmth has been deliberately removed. The grass was wet, even though there had been no rain in days. My shoes squelched with each step, and the sound seemed too loud in the suffocating quiet. There were no crickets, no wind, no distant traffic from the highway. Nothing. The house loomed larger as I approached, and I could see now that it was in a state of extreme decay. The foundation had begun to crack. The porch sagged in the middle like a broken spine, but that light, that horrible blue light, continued to pour from the upstairs windows, pulsing in that rhythmic way that felt less like illumination and more like something signaling. Something calling out into the darkness. I was maybe 30 feet from the front door when I noticed the police tape. It was weathered and faded, nearly invisible against the dark wood. But it was there. Yellow and black, wrapped around the entire perimeter of the property. And stapled to the door frame, barely legible in the dim spill of my flashlight, was a notice. I stepped closer and read it. The words made my blood run cold. It was an official seal and declaration from the Pennsylvania State Police. The property was sealed. No trespassing. No entry. The warning was dated over 18 months earlier. But here's what disturbed me more than anything. There was no legal reason listed. Sealed properties usually have a reason. Ongoing investigation. Evidence preservation. Something. This notice simply stated the fact of the seal and nothing else. It was as if whatever was inside this house was so disturbing that even writing the reason for keeping people out was considered too dangerous. I stood there for nearly 5 minutes, staring at that notice, at that creepy blue light, at the house that the Pennsylvania State Police had sealed and abandoned. That is when I heard the sound from inside. It was not a scream. It was not anything so simple or so human. It was a low vibration, almost below the threshold of hearing, that seemed to resonate directly in my chest. If you have ever stood near a large speaker producing bass so deep you feel it rather than hear it, you understand the sensation. But this was different. This carried with it a quality of absolute wrongness, of something that was not meant to be heard by human ears. My vision started to blur. My ears began to ring. I ran back to my car. I drove for 20 minutes before I found cell service. When I did, I called the non-emergency line for the Pennsylvania State Police. I explained what I had seen and asked about the house. The dispatcher on the other end went silent for so long that I thought the call had dropped. When she spoke again, her voice was different, strained, professional in that way that means someone is being very careful with their words. She told me that they could not discuss any details about that property. When I pressed her, asking if there had been incidents, if there was an active investigation, she repeated the same phrase, "We cannot discuss any details about that property." I asked her if multiple officers had been sent there. Another long silence. "Please stay away from that location," she finally said, "for your own safety." Then she hung up. I researched. I spent weeks pulling police records, looking up incident reports, checking news archives. In those 18 months since the property had been sealed, the Pennsylvania State Police had responded to the address at least 7 times. Some calls came in just days apart. The log entries were minimal. Situation unresolved. Investigation ongoing. Situation unresolved again. And then, one entry that made my hands shake when I read it. Units dispatched. Officer reported sensory disturbance upon approach. Psychological evaluation recommended. Case closed. What does that mean? What kind of sensory disturbance forces a case to be closed? Why would an officer need a psychological evaluation? I began visiting the local libraries and newspaper archives in the small towns near the property. I found old articles about the house, dating back decades. The original family who lived there, the Hendersons, disappeared in 1994. All 7 of them, they were simply gone one morning, leaving behind clothes, cars, money, everything. No signs of struggle, no indication of where they went. The investigation petered out. People in the town did not like to talk about it. When new owners tried to move into the house after that, strange things happened. One family lasted 3 days before they left in the middle of the night, declining to press charges or file a complaint. Another took nearly 2 months, but neighbors reported hearing sounds coming from that property that made them take their children inside, that made their dogs refuse to go near the property line. The utility companies stopped coming to maintain the house after 1998, after an incident that was never fully documented. By 2006, the state had begun the process of sealing it. And by 2022, when the police tape was placed and the official notice was posted, the house had been abandoned and isolated from the world. But here's what terrifies me most. I have discovered that the house was not always abandoned between those times. I found evidence, buried in old blog posts and paranormal investigation websites, that people were living there. Squatters, mostly. Homeless individuals and drifters who saw an empty house and thought they had found shelter. Every single account I found, and there were dozens, followed the same disturbing pattern. They would go into the house. They would last anywhere from 1 to 5 days. And then they would leave, usually in a state of extreme psychological distress. None of them would describe what they had experienced. Several of them, when pressed, simply said, "It was not meant for people to understand." One squatter, a man named Derek Chen, whose account I found on a now-defunct paranormal forum, wrote, "I went in thinking I could handle anything. I came out knowing that I do not know anything. The house taught me that ignorance was the only thing keeping me sane. Derek Chen died 2 years after posting that. The official cause was suicide. He was found in his apartment with his windows sealed shut with duct tape and all the mirrors covered with blankets. I became obsessed. I visited the property again, legally this time, parking on the public road and observing with binoculars from a distance. That blue light never diminished. It never changed. For 3 months, I drove out there, sometimes twice a week, watching that house pulse with its sickly illumination while the darkness around it deepened and thickened. The rational part of my mind kept trying to offer explanations. Neon, exposed wiring, some chemical reaction in the walls. But the deeper I delved into the history of that place, the less rational my explanations seemed. Because the house did not simply trap people. Something about it reached out, affected people who went there, changed them. I started noticing things about the officers who had been called to the property. Through a Freedom of Information request that took 6 months to process, I obtained the names of all 7 officers who had responded to incidents at the house. I looked them up. 2 of them had resigned from the force within weeks of their response. One had transferred to a different state entirely and would not return calls about his service in Pennsylvania. Another had filed for extended medical leave and never came back. Of the remaining 3, all 3 had requested permanent desk duty. None of them would work in the field anymore. But the most disturbing discovery came when I learned about Officer Sarah Mendez. She had responded to the house on a Sunday afternoon in June, 18 months before the seal was posted. She was there for 53 minutes. When she left, she filed a report that simply said, "Situation unresolved. Recommend immediate seal and permanent closure of property." 3 months later, Sarah Mendez requested a psychiatric evaluation. The Pennsylvania State Police granted it. The results were never released. But here's what I found. Sarah Mendez now lives in a private care facility outside of Allentown. She has not spoken a coherent sentence in over a year. She sits and stares at her hands, and according to someone who worked there and posted about it on a social media forum, she sometimes whispers the same phrase over and over again. The light knows. The light knows. The light knows. I do not know what that means. I do not want to know. What I do know is that the Pennsylvania State Police know something about that house. Something so terrifying that they have chosen to seal it indefinitely without explanation. Something that has damaged the minds of trained officers. Something that turns away everyone who encounters it, whether they get close or simply know the truth. And I know that I made a decision that cost me more than I can properly express. 3 weeks ago, I went back to the house. I know how that sounds. I know that I had all the information I needed to stay away, to accept the mystery and move on with my life. But the obsession had become something else. It had become a hunger, a need to understand, a terrifying certainty that if I did not go inside that house and confront whatever was there, I would spend the rest of my life wondering. Being haunted not by what I saw, but by what I failed to see. I cut through the police tape. It tore easily, and the sound of it ripping seemed to echo across the dark field. The front door was locked, but the wood around the frame was rotted enough that one hard kick broke through. The air inside was the same numbness I remembered, but stronger now. It was like stepping into a space where oxygen had been replaced with something else. My lungs worked, but they were not getting air. My heart began to race. I used my flashlight to navigate. The first floor was empty, completely gutted. No furniture, no debris, just hardwood floors and empty rooms with a thickness to the air that made every breath feel like work. But I could hear something. That same low vibration I had heard from outside, but now it was coming from everywhere at once. From the walls, from the floor, from inside my own head. I climbed the stairs. The second floor was where the blue light was coming from, and as I reached the landing, I began to understand why people did not talk about what they experienced in this house. Because the truth of it was beyond words. The human mind does not have language for what was happening. Every surface of the hallway was covered in writing. Not graffiti, not scratches or spray paint. This was deliberate, precise writing, carved and written and somehow burned into the plaster of the walls, the wood of the ceiling, the fabric of the air itself. Words, thousands of them, hundreds of thousands. They covered every inch of visible space, overlapping each other, layered so thickly that it seemed like the walls themselves had something to say. I do not remember reading individual words, but I remember the sensation of understanding them, of having information flood into my mind, not through my eyes but directly into the fundamental parts of my consciousness that processes meaning. And the light, that horrifying blue light, was growing stronger as I read. The words were names, Every person who had ever lived in this house. Every person who had ever entered this house. Every person this house had ever touched. All of them, recorded and preserved in this impossible writing that seemed to exist in more dimensions than a two-dimensional wall should contain. I saw my own name. I was among them. I had been added. The moment I had decided to come back, the moment my intention had solidified, I had been written into the walls of this house. The blue light grew brighter, and I realized it was not coming from any bulb or chemical reaction. It was coming from the walls themselves, from the words. The writing was generating light, or perhaps the light was generating the writing. I could not tell anymore which was source and which was effect. I stood in that hallway for an amount of time I cannot measure. Seconds or hours. Days. Time does not work the same inside that house. And as I stood there, I began to understand what the house was. It was not haunted by ghosts or demons or anything supernatural in the traditional sense. It was something far worse. It was a record, a monument, a catalog of everyone it had ever touched, carved into the fabric of reality itself. Every person who had lived there, every officer who had entered it, every squatter who had sought shelter, every curious person who had come to investigate. We were all there, all of us, preserved in light and writing, recorded for eternity in a way that we could never escape. And the house was still hungry. It was still adding names. I do not know how I got out. I remember running. I remember the sound of my own screaming being absorbed by the walls so completely that I could not even hear myself. I remember the driveway. I remember my car. I remember driving for hours without knowing where I was going. When I finally stopped, I was in a parking lot in Sunbury, and it was dawn. I have not gone back to that house. I will never go back to that house. But the knowledge does not leave you. The understanding that you have been recorded, documented, added to something eternal and terrifying. I spend my nights staring at my hands, wondering if somewhere in a dark hallway 3 hours away, my name continues to glow in that creepy blue light. I wonder if Sarah Mendez knows what it means to see your own name written in light. If that is what drove her to silence. The Pennsylvania State Police know. They sealed the house because they understand. Multiple officers have been there. Multiple officers have seen their own names recorded, and they have chosen to protect everyone else by keeping that knowledge locked away. But the seal is not permanent. Nothing is permanent, and eventually, someone else will go there. Someone else will find that hallway. Someone else will see their name written in impossible light, and that person will have to live with the knowledge that they are no longer really alive. They are recorded, preserved, part of something that is older and darker and far more patient than any human being. I am sharing this because you deserve to know. You deserve to know that there is a house in rural Pennsylvania, still standing, still sealed, still recording. And that if the strange urge ever comes to you to seek it out, to find the truth, to witness the impossible, you should run as far and as fast as you can. Because the house is waiting, and your name might already be on the walls. The house in Pennsylvania is real. The seal is real. The fear that it generates in those who know about it is real. And somewhere, in a room where no light should exist, your story is being written in a glow that will never fade. That is the one truth that will haunt you now, the one certainty that will never leave. And in that way, even if you never go to that house, the house has already come for you. Story 10. Watcher in the window. I saw something that night that changed everything I thought I knew about reality, and I cannot unsee it. Not a day goes by that I do not think about what waited for me in that abandoned house on that forgotten Pennsylvania road. And I know now that some places are not meant to be found. The whole thing started with a wrong turn on Route 322, a highway I had driven 1,000 times without incident. I was heading back to Pittsburgh after visiting my sister in Harrisburg. The weather was turning bad. Dark clouds hung low over the mountains, and the sun was disappearing faster than it should have been. I remember feeling that creeping sense of unease, that primitive instinct that something was not right, but I pushed it aside. I was tired. I was hungry. I just wanted to get home. Then I saw it. There was an exit that was not supposed to be there. I have driven this stretch of highway for 15 years, and I swear on my life that this road did not exist before. The sign was old, weathered, barely readable. It pointed to a place called Mercer Mills, population unknown. The arrow on the sign seemed to shake in my peripheral vision, and I felt my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. I should have kept driving. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to stay on the highway, to ignore this impossible road and forget it existed. But curiosity has always been my greatest weakness. I took the exit. The moment my car left the main highway, the temperature inside the vehicle dropped. I am not exaggerating. It felt like stepping into a walk-in freezer at a grocery store. My breath became visible, little clouds of white vapor that seemed wrong for early autumn. The sun, which had still been visible on Route 322, disappeared completely as soon as I turned onto this new road. The road itself was narrow, barely 2 lanes wide, and it twisted through dense forest. The trees were old, ancient really, with trunks the size of barrels and branches so thick they created a natural tunnel overhead. No light penetrated here. My headlights barely cut through the darkness, and everything they illuminated looked wrong somehow. The shadows between the trees seemed deeper, more solid, as if darkness itself had weight and substance. I drove for what felt like hours but was probably only 15 minutes. I saw no houses, no other vehicles, no signs of human life at all. The forest just kept going, mile after mile of twisted trees and suffocating darkness. The radio in my car had stopped working. Not just static or interference, but complete silence, as if sound itself had been swallowed by this place. Then the forest opened up. I came around a bend and suddenly the trees fell away on both sides. There was a clearing, perhaps 50 acres of overgrown field, and in the center of that field, silhouetted against the starless sky, was the most terrifying structure I have ever laid eyes on. It was a house, or it had been a house once, years ago. Now it was something else entirely. The building was massive, 3 stories tall, with a sprawling wraparound porch that sagged in the middle like the spine of a broken animal. The windows were black and empty, every single one. The paint had peeled away long ago, leaving bare wood that had turned gray and rotted. The roof had collapsed in several places, and I could see the dark interior gaping open like wounds. There was no light anywhere near this structure, no signs of habitation, nothing but decay and abandonment. But something was wrong. Something was fundamentally, horrifyingly wrong about this place. I drove closer. I know now how stupid that was, but at the time I could not stop myself. It was as if the house was pulling me forward, exerting some kind of gravitational force that my car could not resist. My logical mind was screaming warnings, but my body was not listening. I pulled around to the front of the property and stopped maybe 30 yards from the porch. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. The engine was idling, and I sat there in the darkness, staring at this nightmarish structure. And then I saw something that made my blood turn to ice in my veins. There was a figure in the window. It was on the 2nd floor, in what looked like it had once been a bedroom. A pale, motionless shape stood perfectly still, looking directly at my car. The way it was positioned, the way it held itself, made it clear that this figure was aware of my presence. It was watching me. I threw the car into reverse immediately. Gravel sprayed under my tires as I backed away from the house, my eyes locked on that terrible figure in the window. It did not move. It did not raise its hand or gesture or do anything at all. It simply stood there, watching, waiting, an eerie and chilling sentinel in that abandoned structure. I got the car turned around and drove back toward the forest road, my hands shaking so badly I was having trouble controlling the vehicle. I kept checking my rearview mirror, certain that I would see something following me, but there was nothing but darkness behind my taillights. The drive back through the forest seemed longer than before. The darkness felt heavier, more oppressive. My headlights caught glimpses of movement between the trees, shadows that seemed to move independent of any light source. The creeping feeling of being watched intensified until it was almost unbearable. But then, finally, I saw the lights of Route 322 ahead of me. I felt such an overwhelming sense of relief that I nearly wept. I pushed the accelerator down and shot back onto the highway, the normal world of highway lights and other vehicles suddenly feeling like the safest place on earth. I drove the rest of the way to Pittsburgh in silence, not even turning the radio back on. My mind was reeling, trying to make sense of what I had seen. I told myself that I had been tired. My eyes had been playing tricks on me. Shadows on a dark window could look like anything if you were afraid enough. It was pareidolia, that strange human ability to see faces and figures in random patterns. But deep down, I knew better. I could not get that figure out of my head. Every detail was seared into my memory. The way it stood so perfectly still, the pale, almost luminous quality of its form, the sense of awareness, of consciousness, of malevolent intent that radiated from it despite not moving a single muscle. This was no reflection, no trick of light. Something had been in that house. Something had been watching me. For 2 weeks, I tried to forget about it. I threw myself into work. I saw friends. I tried to maintain my normal routine. But every night, I dreamed about that house and that figure. The dreams were vivid and terrifying. I saw the pale shape stepping down from the window, its movements jerky and unnatural. I saw it moving through the dark hallways of that abandoned structure, climbing down the stairs toward me. I heard sounds that might have been footsteps or might have been something far worse. After 2 weeks, I could not stand it anymore. I decided I would drive back to find that house, not to confront whatever was there, but simply to prove to myself that it was real, that I was not losing my mind. I took the same route, same day of the week, same time of evening. I drove out on Route 322, and I watched carefully for that impossible exit. But it was not there. I drove past where I thought it should have been, and there was nothing but forest. I pulled over and checked my phone to see if I could navigate back using GPS. There was no Mercer Mills on any map. There was no road marked on the map where I remembered taking that exit. It was as if the entire place had been erased from existence. I tried again the next day, and the day after that. I must have driven Route 322 a dozen times looking for that exit, and I never found it again. It was then that I began to understand the horrifying nature of what I had encountered. I started researching online. I spent hours in internet forums dedicated to unexplained phenomena and paranormal investigations. I searched for stories about abandoned houses in Pennsylvania, about strange roads that did not exist on maps, about figures seen in windows of buildings that were supposed to be empty. And that was when I found them. Not in the forums, but in old newspaper archives and historical society records. Stories from the 1970s, reports from state police, dozens of accounts from different people over the course of several months, all describing the same terrifying experience. A road that appeared out of nowhere on Route 322. A creepy, dilapidated house at the end of that road. A pale figure seen watching from the windows. Every single account was nearly identical to my own experience, and every single one ended the same way. The witnesses returned to look for the road, and it was gone. No record of it, no evidence it had ever existed. Then the reports stopped. There were no more sightings after 1977. It was as if the house, the road, and whatever dwelled in them had simply vanished from the world. Until I saw it, I found one more piece of information buried in a digitized newspaper archive. It was a brief article from 1977, reporting on a missing persons case. A man named Thomas Mercer had disappeared from his home in the area. The article mentioned that he had been suffering from severe psychological disturbances. He had become obsessed with the idea of creating a place that existed outside of normal reality, a pocket of space where different rules apply. He had become violent, and his family had tried to have him committed. He disappeared before they could force him into an institution. The article included a photograph. I saw the face of Thomas Mercer, and something inside my chest seized up with primal terror. The face was pale, almost white, as if drained of blood. The eyes were enormous, staring directly at the camera with an intensity that burned through the grainy photograph. The hair was white despite the fact that he could not have been more than 40 years old. And as I stared at that photograph, I realized something that made my hands start shaking. I had seen that face before. I had seen it in that window. I have not been able to sleep properly since that realization. Every night I lie awake in the darkness, listening to sounds in my apartment that might be nothing but feel like everything. I check the locks on my doors and windows obsessively. Sometimes, late at night, I look out my own windows and I feel certain that something is looking back in at me, watching from the darkness beyond the glass. But the worst part, the truly unsettling thought that haunts me every moment, is this. That road, that impossible road that no longer appears on any map. That abandoned house full of shadows and decay. That pale, watchful figure in the window. It is still there. I know it is. It exists in some space between the normal world and wherever madmen go when they die. It is still waiting. It is still watching. And I sometimes wonder if the reason I cannot find that road again is not because it does not exist, but because it is waiting for the right time. It is waiting for me to take that exit again. And I suspect, deep in the horrifying depths of my consciousness, that eventually I will. That something in my mind has been changed by what I saw that night. Some piece of my soul has been marked, claimed, drawn toward that terrible place. It will pull at me more insistently with each passing year until finally, one night when I am driving past that section of highway, I will see the exit. And this time, I do not think I will be able to turn back. There is something in that abandoned house that feeds on the fear and curiosity of people like me. Something that exists just outside the boundaries of our reality, in the dark places that do not appear on maps. Something that has been hungry for a very long time. And it is still waiting. It is still watching. Right now, at this very moment, something pale and motionless stands in a window of a house that should not exist on a road that should not be there. It is looking out at the darkness, waiting for the next car to take that impossible exit. Waiting for the next person to see it standing there in that empty window. Watching, always watching. And once you have seen it, you never truly leave. Part of you stays in that house, in that darkness, forever bound to it. The roads of our world are longer than we think. The maps we trust are incomplete. And there are places in Pennsylvania, in the spaces between what we understand and what we do not, where something old and terrible and patient continues to keep its lonely vigil. This is what I've come to believe. This is the truth that I cannot escape. And I am telling you this story in the hope that you will listen to my warning. Be careful on your drives through unfamiliar places. Watch for roads that do not appear on your map. And if you ever see an exit that should not be there, if you find yourself driving toward an abandoned house at the end of a dead road, resist with every fiber of your being the urge to look up at the windows. Because once you see the figure looking back down at you, you will never be free from this horror again. You will always wonder if you can see it again. And you will always fear the night you finally do. Pennsylvania is full of abandoned houses that look empty. But after hearing these stories, you know that empty doesn't always mean safe. Subscribe to Vesper Shroud for more true horror stories, because some places don't let people leave.